So, if you ask me, I'm kind of sick of the whole manga versus comics debate. Despite how similar they are as storytelling mediums, for some reason the two are always pitted against each other, with some fans claiming that American comics are quote-unquote dying and citing Japanese manga as the cause. And usually this leads to people attacking fans and creators on the other side. And as a fan and a reader of both, I don't think it's all that serious. Trying to compare them can sometimes be like an apples to oranges situation, and I frankly kind of hate the quote-unquote rivalry between manga and Western comics. I mean, come on. Western comics? Like, Jonah Hex is cool and all, but besides him, there aren't that many comics about cowboys.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
This video is brought to you by Manta Sleep. I'm someone who sleeps a lot while the sun is up, but I'm kind of a light sleeper and I'm really sensitive to any kind of sunlight. But Manta makes the world's best sleep masks and functional sleep accessories, letting me sleep better anywhere and anytime. They have a huge variety of different kinds of masks for whatever kind of sleeper you might be. There's the original Manta Sleep mask, which gives 100% blackout without any pressure on the eyes. There's a cooling mask, a steam mask, a weighted mask for anxiety, a hypoallergenic silk mask, and even a mask with built-in Bluetooth headphones that still let you sleep on your side while listening to things like white noise. I am very much a side sleeper, so I got the Manta Sleep Mask Pro, which provides a true 100% blackout experience for an even deeper sleep. It has C-shaped eye cups to make it more comfortable on my side, puts zero pressure on my eyelids, and is made of advanced materials with ventilation for unmatched breathability. No joke, I really love this thing. I'm perpetually exhausted all the time, but using it with regular naps has boosted my energy so much, more than any coffee or energy drink ever could. And that's why part of Manta's mission is taking a stand against hustle culture with their pro-nap movement. The human body is designed to take naps. They give you energy, focus, strength, and clarity that you can't muscle or grind your way through. Check out Manta Sleep using the link in the description, and make sure to use code TROYOBOYO for 10% off your order. Special thanks to Manta Sleep for sponsoring this video, and thanks to my patrons who are able to get my videos early and ad-free for just $1 a month. Now, I don't really want to spend this whole video talking about business politics and why comics are dying and have that same conversation over and over and over again. I definitely think that there's something to talk about there, and there are definitely things that the comics industry can and should do to help stay afloat. I want it to succeed, I want the creators to be able to be paid well, and I want stories with my favorite characters to continue to be told. There's a whole plethora of things that they could do. I really like how James Gunn is handling everything by using the platform of the movies to push and promote the comics, and that's had a huge benefit on the book sales. But there's also massive cultural differences that play a part. Manga is a huge part of Japan's culture, and so many people want American comics to try and replicate that popularity. Meanwhile, here in America, we have football and The Bachelor, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. Comics are kind of always going to be a niche hobby around here, regardless of how popular the movies might be, and that's fine with me. And I think the idea that the American comic industry is dying because books aren't selling as well as they did in the 90s is very much a doomer mentality, and it's not something I'm putting much stake in, especially when that conversation seems to always lead to some racist stereotypes or flat out fetishization of Japan, or some grifter comics are bad now because they're woke, unlike my completely apolitical pirate book, I'm very smart kinds of takes. Me personally, I'm not really interested in all that. I'd rather focus on the stories and the creators. I want to talk about the mediums overall and the art that they produce, their strengths, their weaknesses, and what we can learn from the two in order to get a better picture and a better appreciation for both American comics and manga. By the way, I'm mainly going to be talking about the big two comic companies here, Marvel and DC. Independent comics are equally important, and there are tons of amazing books from other publishers, and a lot of people tend to flat out ignore them when it comes to this conversation, but obviously it's a little bit easier to get into something like Radiant Black or do a Powerbomb or Invincible than it is the X-Men. So when I say comics in this context, I know that that can mean a whole lot of different things, but just to save myself on the sheer word count of this video, I'm going to use that to refer to Marvel and DC books. One of the biggest strengths of manga as a medium is purely how accessible it is. For any manga storyline that you want to read, whatever genre or imprint, and no matter how old it is, you always have a clear and easy to understand place to start. If you want to start reading Chainsaw Man, for example, where do you start? With number 1. It's as simple as that. For the majority of manga, even long-running Shonen Jump titles, the books are traditionally written by a single writer, as opposed to multiple writers and creators jumping in and out. This makes character development and story arcs more consistent, and it means that no matter what you read in a series, it'll always be a part of the original creator's vision, and you'll always get a clear through line from beginning to end. And on the topic of accessibility, the pipeline of adapting manga into anime is another way to get the stories more out there. Of course, some anime will take liberties when it comes to the source material for one reason or another, but for the most part, the adaptations are another way to get the stories to a larger audience and more people reading the books. Most of the time, you can even pick up and start reading where a season of the anime left off. Combine all of that with how you can't go 5 minutes without seeing a manga book on a store shelf of a variety of different genres, from shonen to romance to horror to slice of life, you name it. And manga is literally as easy as humanly possible to get into. And that's made a huge impact on the sales and the number of people who can experience those stories. And that accessibility is often used as a criticism of the comics industry, at least with the big two. We're reading something like Naruto is as easy as starting with number 1, with how much comics like to reboot and rebrand and retcon everything all the spin-offs and crossovers and crises, it's not as simple trying to start something like Batman, and oftentimes even getting started with reading comics can be one of the biggest hurdles. I very much understand that it can be a little bit tough to get started, especially if you don't know anyone who's willing to help you out, but I honestly think a lot of people tend to overthink comics. Because while getting into something like Batman isn't nearly as simple as start from the beginning, I think that comic publishers have actually done a lot in attempts to make things simpler and more accessible. Because as much as it might sound insane with surely how many books there are, you can honestly start reading wherever you want. Now, you absolutely could start from the beginning of a character's run and try and read every single issue as far back as the 1930s. Don't do that, that's insane. It can work for some characters like Spider-Man, but still, there are very few people on the planet who have actually read every single issue of a mainline title from beginning to end like that. Me personally, my first comics that I ever bought were the New 52 Aquaman and All-Star Batman and Robin. Let's just say that one of those books is really good, but I really started reading consistently when DC launched their Rebirth line, which was specifically geared to new readers. The rule with getting into comics, either as a new reader or trying to get into new characters, is to try and jump in at either a book labeled #1 or where a writer for the book changes. There are a lot of #1s out there, which is part of the confusion, and that's because of a couple different reasons. Firstly, #1s just sell more, and so it's a cheap and easy way to get some more sales out of something. But more importantly, when a book gets rebranded to #1, that's usually the company's way of trying to tell new readers that this is a good place to get started. If you're confused about what happened before and the potential canon and lore, there are a lot of different resources, both official and unofficial, to help catch you up to speed. Some of them might even be built straight into the comics. And Google is your friend. Okay, actually, wait, never mind. What's that other search engine? Ecosia is your friend. They're cool, I think. Basically, it's perfectly okay to be reading a book, see something or see a character that you don't know, and look them up on a Wikipedia page or ask somebody. Nobody has read every single comic ever, especially when it comes to these long-form books, and it's okay to admit that you don't know something and to ask for help. If you ask me, and I don't mean any disrespect to anyone by saying this, I actually think that a lot of the comics are too hard to get into discourse is from people who haven't actually taken the chance to actually sit down and try. I swear to God, I'm not gatekeeping. I'm not doing any of that shit. Genuinely, it's a misconception. It might take a little bit of extra research. Maybe you'll have to ask around online or someone at the store, but every hobby is going to have a little bit of a barrier to entry. And once you get over that initial hurdle and actually start reading comics, I promise you it becomes incredibly easy. But if that's still not enough for you, or if you're still really struggling to just get started reading without any baggage or complications, there's always going to be Elseworld stories set outside of or adjacent to the main canon of the universe that anybody can just pick up and read. And those books also tend to get forgotten about in this debate. In all honesty, I found a lot more enjoyment in those kinds of Elseworld stories purely because they're more detached from editorial interference and trying so hard to stick to their own canon, and they end up usually having a clear ending. And the biggest and most popular example is Ultimate Spider-Man. Ultimate Spider-Man is, for all intents and purposes, the manga version of Spider-Man, which is ironic because we already have a couple manga Spider-Man. The book was literally created as a jumping off point for new readers, a reinterpretation of classic stories for a modern audience, all under the direction of one singular writer. It was even a big inspiration for Kohei Horikoshi for My Hero Academia. You can start reading Ultimate Spider-Man from issue #1 all the way to 160, and you will get the entire story aside from like a couple crossovers that really don't matter in the end. And Marvel just announced that they're actually going to be bringing back Ultimate Spider-Man, being helmed by two of my favorite creators right now, Jonathan Hickman and Marco Checchetto. I'm not entirely sure what direction the book is going to take or how long it's going to last or any of the details, but I'd love it if that same mindset is applied to this one. A long-form, easily accessible story from one creative team that spans over the course of years. I'd actually like it if they took it a step further, if Ultimate Spider-Man became a title that got refreshed every 5 to 10 years with a new powerhouse team being able to tell their story from beginning to end. I mean, that's basically what the book was back when it started and before it became burdened with the rest of the Ultimate Universe. I go on that whole tangent not just to make the video longer or keep the Spider-Man fans interested.
So, back in the day, jingle, jingle, jingle.
But also because while I know that a lot of people see the how complicated it is to get started and being able to start from anywhere makes it a little bit difficult as a problem with the comics industry, I actually see it as one of the biggest strengths. The ability to choose what you want to read, regardless of what came before or what you know about the characters, is one of the best parts about being a comic reader. You don't have to keep up with every little event or crossover or storyline. If you see a book that looks interesting to you or is from a creative team that you know you like, chances are you can just pick it up and read it. It's a very freeing mentality that I think is mostly exclusive to the medium of comic books. And then there's one piece of So I've been getting into One Piece for the first time, and just like any other One Piece fan, I have to tell everyone I know that I'm really into One Piece. And I'm gonna give a crazy hot take here. One Piece is really long. It's a book that's been going on for over 25 years. There are over 1,000 chapters to it, and it's not even finished. It's like comically long. And now that I say that out loud, there's a double meaning there. It's so long that it's funny, but also it's about as long as some Western comics. And while I think the length is part of the experience of One Piece and is part of why the adventure is so special, there's definitely still a barrier to entry solely because of how long it is. Sure, you can just start at number 1, but it's so demoralizing to try and get into it right now and see just how much further ahead you have to go before you can really talk to anyone about it. By the way, I just started Arabasta. Luffy is my new favorite character in all of fiction, and if you spoil any of this for me, you will make me cry. But unlike something like Batman, where you're able to read just whatever you want, whenever you want, with One Piece, you don't really have a choice but to put in that time and that effort, and that's something that not everybody might have, which kind of goes against the idea that manga is more accessible. And when it comes to multiple writers on a comic over the years, as opposed to manga's singular writer, I actually think that multiple writers is another strength for comics. Yes, it can definitely lead to some inconsistencies and issues concerning character arcs and retcons, but the flip side of it is that it allows for so many unique and individual voices to be able to try their hand at a character for a while before passing that off to a new perspective. My go-to example is always Green Arrow, because look at me, you know? When he was first introduced, he was literally a carbon copy of Batman. He had a teenage sidekick, an Arrow Cave, an Arrow Car, an Arrow Plane, beat for beat, just Batman with a bow, which I guess the CW decided to take and just run with. And it wasn't until Denny O'Neil's time on the character, along with Neil Adams, did Green Arrow change and develop into his own unique hero, and is the reason why so many people like me love him so much. Those classic books are a lot of fun, don't get me wrong, but if there is just one person running for Green Arrow the entire time, then the character would have likely just faded into obscurity. Because the way I see it, and this always sounds like such an annoying take, and I'm sorry, but these characters in these stories are very much modern mythology. And I don't just mean that in the sense that in 5 to 10 years after civilization collapses, aliens will probably find our artifacts and our fossils and think we worshipped Chris Evans' abs. But nobody reads Hercules or Zeus or any Greek mythology stories from A to B. There's no real beginning or end to those, just important moments in their histories that have value and meaning as stories. The same applies to comic characters like Batman, Superman, and Spider-Man. Basically what I'm saying is, for everything that people think is wrong with the comics industry compared to manga and the way that the stories are told, I think they're all part of the experience and are actually a strength of the medium. It's not a bug, it's a feature. Because we can debate manga versus comics as much as we want, but at the end of the day, they're both just fucking comics. They're both based on sequential images to tell a story. They're both released in single chapters and then collected in trades. They both have serious systemic issues when it comes to deadlines and crunch in the treatment of their workers, as well as hypersexualization of female characters. They both have entitled fans who harass and attack creators for not meeting their excruciating demands. Literally, the only thing that's actually different about the two is the direction that you read the panels. Sure, manga might be doing better in sales numbers, and I think comics can and should look into trying to replicate some of that success when it comes to printing and distribution and accessibility. These companies need to be better about reprinting trades, especially the popular ones. They need to be better about distributing books to places that may not have local comic book stores. They need to start making it more clear which books are good for newer readers or where to start if they're not. But purely on a fundamental level, they're the same storytelling medium. They're not at odds with each other. They don't compete. The same way that music from Latin American countries is still music and movies from Korea are still movies, and they're not a different category altogether. Comics are comics. Even comics from Japan are still comics. And that's why I can't stand this discourse and this rivalry, because you can compare apples to oranges all day, but really, when you break it down, they're still both fruits. But let me know down below what you think of the whole manga comics debate, and if you like this video, be sure to let the YouTube algorithm know and hit the like button and subscribe. Special thanks to 21 Escalators, Also the Sting, and Cabbage Boy, Calamari13, Cassidy, Chicken McToofus, Cosmic Tragedy, Deco PY, DJ Ricky08, Egan McFarlane, Eden Kenna, Iron Ninja, Jake Selig, Jonah, Corey's Not Fresh, Murin09, Pencil Fan, Simply Dan, Tim Neufeld, Troy Says By Ragers Lame, Tyler Goodrich, Josh Kapoor, Zachary Stonebreaker, and Zero to Hero 148 for being spectacular fanboys on my Patreon. This has been Troy Boy 17 coming at you live. Be responsible, and I'll see you around.